Hello there and welcome to this episode of the Movies in Focus podcast. I'm Niall Brown. Film scholar and returning guest James Kenney has a knack for uncovering lost and forgotten cinematic treasures. You can listen to episodes 18 and 32 of this podcast to learn about his headline-making work on Peter Bogdanovich's Squirrels to the Nuts and the rediscovery of the original version of the Keanu Reeves and Ana de Armas film, God's Daughter. James now returns to discuss his latest find, Brian De Palma's lost film script, Ambrose Chapel. The now published screenplay features an introductory essay from James, which examines De Palma's fascinating and stylish career as a master of suspense. Written by De Palma in the 1990s between Carlito's Way and Mission Impossible, audiences can finally catch sight of De Palma's screwball noir. Virtual reality, mind control, and De Palma's famed voyeurism are the order of the day for this Hitchcock-inspired Mexico City-set thriller. James digs into the origins of Ambrose Chapel, exploring how it fits within De Palma's many signature themes. The conversation takes a broader look at De Palma's legendary career, tracing his evolution as a filmmaker and examining how Ambrose Chapel fits into his cinematic legacy, ultimately offering a look at one of Hollywood's most misunderstood auteurs. And, as always, I hope you enjoy what we have to talk about. Well, thank you again for taking part in another lost movie extravaganza.
I'm now the film archaeologist, as
Yes.
a social media compañero called me, because I guess between the Bogdanovich and then there was the G. Malik Linton film and then this screenplay and there's another screenplay in this series the publisher Sticking Place Books is putting out that I have uncovered by a pretty famous guy that hopefully, I mean, it should be published, but until the contract's signed, I can't say much about it. But,
We'll talk about that
yeah,
another time. But
yeah.
how did the De Palma come about? Because is that something that you discovered yourself, or that was discovered that you then got on board as the sort of writing introduction and the editing or whatever?
No, I mean, it's, I'm not the first person to have read this script, but it's a script that's not like widely out there or anything like that. And I came across it and I said, well, wait a minute, this is a good script, A, and B, um, it's it's not an outlier, meaning like, I didn't find some weird French Revolution drawing room drama written by De Palma. I mean, which would be interesting too, but this is a script that's, if you're a De Palma fan, if you call yourself that, you have to love Dress to Kill and Blowout and Body Double and Sisters, and this is another one of his sort of erotic, strange, paranoid thrillers. So it seemed to me like I felt like why wouldn't people would be interested to read this, and
And
so
to back it up, just to get it to put it in a bit of context, where does well, what is the plot of Ambrose Chapel? Let's begin with that, and then we'll put it where it begins in the chronological aspect of his career. So what's it about?
I mean, Ambrose Chapel, it's rather baroque and I would say a bit more so overtly comic than some of his other paranoid thrillers. It involves a female protagonist, Christy Rivera, who's I guess a Mexican American. It's a little complicated. She's got a Mexican mother and she's got an American father, and she's a journalist in Mexico City who. Oh no, it's not even. That's not even correct. I guess she's kidnapped when she's still an American journalist at the beginning of the script, and then as we pick up the action and as things develop, she's working in Mexico City on the early shift as a news anchor, and she finds herself having strange flashbacks she doesn't understand, and she finds herself having dreams she doesn't understand, um, and she goes to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I guess, this guy Dr. Nick Wolf, who she hopes can help her, and um, it turns out she's not crazy. There's something very strange going on, and that she has been perhaps programmed, or something happened to her during her kidnapping, which is then the film. The rest of the film is A, trying to figure out what is she been programmed to do, and B, can they stop it without even knowing what it is she's been programmed to do. Um, Pretty much, I guess sums it up as well as anything, right? I guess.
No,
I
that's a
mean,
pretty that's pretty much how I would explain the synopsis, because there's a lot of themes going on. there's obviously mind control. There's the voyeurism of the Palma film. There's the screwball element that you mentioned in your introduction. There's a lot of comedy or a lot of humor, which people don't necessarily think of De Palma. And yeah, it's a weird screenplay, and you see him from my perspective, and tell me if I'm wrong, but basically having fun with bringing all his elements together and sort of letting loose.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's if you're a De Palma fan, though, one thing you recognize is that there's always been a sense of humor. That Sisters is darkly funny, Dressed to Kill. I mean, it's stuff where it's like can be black comedy or whatever term you want to use. And then you would argue, I mean, and perhaps some of his most intense films, Blowout and Casualties of War, obviously, you would say no, the comedy's a bit drained in those, in a sense that he's playing for a certain type of keeps. I mean, large parts of Carrie, I think, are darkly funny, but what happened with this one, and this might go back to the chronology, is this is one he wrote in the mid '90s or early to mid '90s, and he had just done, Casualties of War and Untouchables, which were his big hits, but then Bonfire of the Vanities, which, never got on track. It was a big production that never quite
Which
found
is
its
a film I
groove.
love. I love that as a film. It's a mess, but I enjoy it.
Well, like as I think I said once about Bogdanovich, the screwed up souffle of a master chef is still more interesting than maybe a store bought 99-cent cake. And I feel a lot of Hollywood these days is store bought 99-cent cakes, no matter what the price tag for the movie. So Bonfire of Vanities, I do find it. I'm not sure it all coheres in a way that I would find classically satisfying, but there's just so much stuff in it, like with a lot of films. But then, and so then I guess he sort of, and I don't want to speak for him, but you read it as a film fan. After Bonfire, he did Raising Cain, which is probably, that and Femme Fatale are probably closest to this one in tone, because I think those are, maybe you could argue post 1990 he was a bit more overtly humorous in some of these works. Like Raising Cain is nuts, if you've seen the film. Um, but I mean, I wholly think, there's no doubt he's in on the joke. That when the doctor and Stephen Bauer are making romantic entreaties to each other next to his comatose wife, and then they realize she's awake, she dies instantly when she sees them, kissing. I'm just saying, I think Ambrose Chapel kind of runs with that a little bit. That there's a lot of stuff in there. I think, as I wrote in my introduction, by the end of the film, the bad guys don't even know what's going on. They seem very, it seems very confused as to what's happening and why it's happening. And this, as far as I've ascertained, was written after Carlito's Way, and before Mission Impossible, and I guess, so it's hard to know exactly, other than, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Mission Impossible was the film he changed agents, I think, then, and that's how he got plugged into this. So he might have enjoyed making things like Raising Cain, and maybe Ambrose Chapel would have been more of that, but then he obviously went to an agent who got him plugged into $100 million or whatever, Tom Cruise film. Now, interestingly, the one thing I'll add is apparently it was still being, like, after Snake Eyes, he was still trying to mount this, though, like in the late '90s, and that's one reason I thought it was worth the one in a million chance to pursue Brian or Mr. De Palma, to see if he might want to publish this, because it seemed like a project that fits into his larger work. And as you said, with the themes, I mean, there's the theme of the parent controlling the child in malicious ways, um, of mind control, of like what is reality and what is a lie. I mean, it's all very, very much in his wheelhouse, including, I would say, again, the most humorous Hitchcock um, references he made were,
Well, they're blatant Hitchcock references, which
well,
is
this one, it's clear, it's the movie The Man Who Knew Too Much comes into play. Um, but as I think I mentioned, well, in my introduction too, that I don't think it was unintentional that he seems to point out that you have all these Mexicans who have the dyed blonde hair. It's like the Hitchcockian blondes, and then he finds people
yes.
who doesn't come natural to, so they all dye their hair. So and so it just, so yeah, so it was written in the '90s, and it seems that obviously for all his high profile works for hire. I mean, Carlito's Way is a masterpiece, but I still think somebody came to him with that project. In fact, I'm positive of it. It
That's
wasn't like
David
his.
David Kep wrote that, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it was the producer and Pacino maybe came to him with
Right.
the original. Not it was based on books by a judge. I'm forgetting his name, and so I couldn't tell you. I didn't prepare in that sense. I forgot if Kep was hired by De Palma or if the script was already there. I just meant that, for example, that and Mission Impossible and Bonfire of the Vanities were works for hire, whereas Casualties of War, I believe, was very much a project he wanted. I mean, it had been around for years. He wasn't the first guy to originate it, and actually a British director, who Jack Clayton, I think, was actually trying to get it
Right.
done in the 1970s. Yeah, the Casualties of War book that was published by the same publisher as this. I never knew that. There's a comprehensive book called Casualties of War, a case study, I believe, which if somebody's a fan should pick it up because it has all this stuff. Um, that this and, for example, Raising Cain, though, seem to be more like what organically comes out of him when he has ideas. He likes these psychological, twisty, outrageous thrillers. And
And they're always, I mean, not to belittle it, and I mean this in the best possible way, but they're B movies. What I think he gets to flourish when he's taken away from the trappings of big budget, and when he's somewhat restricted. I think that's when the best De Palma stuff comes out. Do you agree?
I don't necessarily agree because I think Casualties of War is a masterpiece, and that's kind of like when he, because of Untouchables, he actually had the toy set to do what he wanted. So he made this very dark, not and there's very little artistic commercial compromise in
Yeah.
Casualties of War. And again, I would argue that, I mean, Blowout was an expensive film, which he got to make after Dress to Kill was a hit. So I would sort of argue that it isn't like when he gets a larger budget, he loses his way because some of the, Blowout might be the best of these thrillers. But I think he has an interest which he's not apologetic for, other than but he's making Body Double and he's making Sisters. So again, for that class of directors that he's grouped with correctly, the new Hollywood directors like Scorsese and Coppola and Lucas, and um, he seems to have a disreputable streak to him, meaning he likes certain types of stories that again are more of a piece with Dario Argento than they are with Coppola, necessarily. So I could see, yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of his low budget work is where he's is doing his own thing, whereas Bonfire of the Vanities and even Untouchables, he's clearly beholden to Mamet's script to an extent. I mean, there was work done beyond Mamet's work, but yeah, when he's left to his own devices, there does seem to be a lot of naughty sort of genre.
Yes.
Um,
And when so you I'll say discovered the screenplay, but found the screenplay, read the screenplay. How does it end up getting published with your introduction? Talk me through that process.
it's a secret. Oh no, it was just that ultimately I make my living as a professor. I teach for the City University of New York, and I teach freshman writing. And this is part of the story because I teach ethos, pathos, and logos. Argumentation, how to win arguments using emotion and logic. And so it was humorous because I was I asked her, I was able to get contact info for Brian De Palma, and partially this is again credibility, having the Bogdanovich film play in the Museum of Modern Art and play in England and play in Australia, and now it's officially available in America.
Yes.
Um, and then the G. Malik Linton film playing at the film festivals in New York. And I just meant that I was able to use that to say I'm not a crackpot. I'm a guy who's done certain things, and I just wrote a letter saying I think this is a great script, and I've done some interesting things, and that I think might show that I could and the publisher. This is the publisher of my Bogdanovich book, so I went to him and said, hey, would you want to publish this De Palma screenplay? And he said absolutely. He'd already published. I didn't realize the Werner Herzog screenplay and I forget. Oh, the guy who wrote Ghost, Bruce Joel Rubin, who De Palma knew in the past. But so, in other words, this series had already begun where he was publishing unproduced screenplays. And so I just wrote Brian De Palma, and it took a few weeks, but then he wrote back and he said, I'd love to publish it, was his answer. Um, and so I don't want to call myself the Brian Whisperer, but it's like I've always had the impression that he's not a guy who suffers fools
Yeah.
gladly. So it just seemed um, but if you remember too, or maybe you don't remember, but when Casualties of War came out, I think he didn't do a press junket. He refused to do the press junket, but he did do a very lengthy interview with the guys who ran De Palma Net at the time. Which, this is back in the early days of the internet, that there was an unofficial Brian De Palma site that was filled with info, and he did a lengthy interview with them. And so, I would say partially, without trying to get in trouble, maybe he just sort of said, "Hey, you know what? I appreciate somebody who loves the work just trying to do something interesting with it." And so it was actually a relatively easy process. Now the interesting part was the script he had was neither fish nor fowl, because I guess chasing money, um, the draft ended up not quite making sense because it partially took place in Mexico City and partially took place in Paris because I think there was French money he was chasing, perhaps. So he did a quick sort of rewrite to give them a sense, but you actually had Paris locations but characters with Latino names, or like Mexican locations that turned into Paris locations. So it wasn't just like we published as is. We did a little bit of editing, um, and including which under Brian's supervision, like some of the action, because he was writing the script for himself. So again, he didn't need to really write it to excite people. He just needed a blueprint to
Visualize what he wanted to shoot. Yeah.
so I did come back to him and say, well, perhaps we could take this block of text which has in it two different deaths plus this, a plus that, break it more like shots, like have a sentence and start a new paragraph and start a new paragraph, and he was all for that. So I'm just saying it's his script, but we did reformat some of the action to make it more readable for somebody who's not necessarily a professional.
What's it like telling Brian De Palma how to break down his basically shot list? How do you feel having done that, and how do you feel having to approach him to do that?
Well, this was all via email. It's been an email relationship. He's not in New York City at this point anyway. I think he's moved. He sold it. He was a New York City resident for a long time, but I think he might be living in the Hamptons or something, if you've heard of it. But that's neither here nor there. Other than, I never met him personally. I still haven't met him. It's all via email. But that he no, I just wrote to him again. I said, hey, here I have a question. Here's a passage. I think maybe it might read more effectively for the general reader if we do this. And if he wrote back and said no, okay, well, do it your way. Well, I wasn't trying to
Your
force
Brian De
myself upon
Palma,
him.
yeah.
And he said no, that works. Do that. That's what it's. No, he was amenable to it being put out in the best possible way, but yeah, there wasn't much effort of mine to try to convince him of anything or say we should do this differently. Just basically, hey, could I format this a little more cleanly? And he said sure. And then the closest thing, well, no, when it was done, he reread it. I guess he just, and he said good job, pure Mexican, which is the nicest compliment I've ever gotten. I mean, I could write pure Mexican in quotes from Brian De Palma, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is the idea that we did get it cleaned up and back to being a Mexico City script. 100%. So
You mentioned Paris there, because I was reading it, and what it reminded me of, which strike me, tell me if I'm wrong, because I think you messaged me, or we had a bit of pass by on Twitter, but it reminded me a lot of Arsenic's Necessary as a tonal piece, and even the way there's a lot of the male female dynamic with. I know Arsenic's Necessary was published as a book, but I presume that started off as a screenplay. Do you know that, if there's crossover there?
I have no idea about if Our Snake's Necessary started as a screenplay or not. I don't know. I mean, in other words, it was published as a novel, I guess, written by him and his partner. I don't assume they're together. The woman. And this is not from me knowing anything from Brian. This is me knowing it from the internet.
Yep.
It's like she was just. I guess they're dating or living together, or whatever. So I mean, again, I would argue that things in this sort of show up again in Femme Fatale too. Where you feel he's trying out certain things, and that when the script wasn't sold originally, certain aspects, including it's not like a spoiler, but you know with some of these works like Femme Fatale and things like that, there's a in its own darkly humorous way, it's a bit more of an optimistic film than some of his others. The girl sees her own death halfway through Femme Fatale and is able to right the ship basically, by the end of the film. Whereas in Blowout, and Dressed to Kill, like characters we like, there's no exit for him, there's no escape for him. And Ambrose Chapel has that sort of loony romantic quality that I see in Femme Fatale, even with the Banderas and the where it's just like somehow you keep thinking something horrible is going to happen. Horrible things do happen, but I think, as I said, often you have these set pieces where you can imagine the cross cutting, and they end up more with the punchline than they do with like a violent
Yeah.
reveal or something like that. Um, so again, Arsenic's Necessary. I've read again. I would agree to you that it might seem like it could have been a screenplay because it doesn't strike me as really being quite successful as a novel.
No, it's very much. I mean, again, you could
Yeah.
probably spend a week stripping that back into a screenplay, and it wouldn't really change anything from the
But
text.
again, it's like, and I say this because I'm not trying to give off the wrong impression. It's not like me and Brian have spoken about much other than this project. I mean, like he showed interest in the Bogdanovich book, which I appreciate. He talked a little about that, and I spoke to him about that. Well, yeah. Here's. See, I can't tell if he's putting us on or not, but here's a little controversy is I had actually posted, because this is what it says on the IMDb and various places, that he had directed those short clips from the Bob Seger video. Have you caught that? That there's the American Storm video,
I
and
think I saw.
there's
Yes,
yeah, and if you watch it, there are short sequences from an imaginary action film starring James Woods and Leslie Ann Warren and Scott Glenn and Randy Quaid, I think, and there's all these like, little clips from a fake movie which are attributed to Brian De Palma. And so in an email, I said, "Hey, Brian, did you direct that stuff?" And he wrote, "No." So I'm not sure what to do with that info, because it wasn't just like one website. I mean, the IMDb has it listed on his filmography. Um, but I guess if somebody else wants to do some research and get their PhD, here's a new a topic to research, that there is these sequences where you know people said it was by Brian De Palma, and considering the cast that showed up for these 90 seconds of footage, it sounded to me like plausible that Brian De Palma directed these bits.
and when he was doing music videos, it sort of makes
It was a
sense
few
that.
years after the
Yeah,
Dancing in the Dark and everything, or so. I have. I'm not trying to create controversy, but maybe he was just in a bad mood and just didn't want to talk to me, because it's certainly possible. I just asked about it. He goes, "Oh no, I didn't shoot that." So I'll save that for you know. I didn't do a follow up. I didn't demand he explain to me.
that's the
Um,
next book. Yeah, you can break that down.
yeah, I mean, and I said it's just really cool that I saw the script and I said, well, wait a minute, it would make I mean, even a few people have read it, but I mean, this is sort of like the perfected version. Not, nothing was updated for the 21st century or anything, because part of it's amusing how he was sort of like looking into virtual reality back before it had become any kind of real thing. And it's fascinating how, I guess, as I said in the intro, I think it was more based on Ross Perot, this independent millionaire who ran for president in the 90s. But in 1994, he's writing about some, racist guy who's running for president who wants to build a wall, between Mexico and the U.S. I was like, that's pretty good, bro.
Well, I mean, obviously, I mean, he's always been into the political, the darkness of politics, and I think that probably was the next level. Is he interested in still making it? I mean, for you to publish it, what sort of rights did you have to sign off? Was it owned by a studio? Did he own it? And is he still
This
sort of
was his
corporate?
script. It was that's what I'm saying. It wasn't made, so he owned the script. I mean, that could be an issue because, yeah, dealing with um, all the stuff. You just can't go, I'm going to publish anything. So, for example, Brian De Palma wrote an early version of Cruising, which I'm sure people would be fascinated to read, but Cruising was based on a novel and is owned by Warner Brothers, whoever made the film. I don't know. So you don't just publish it; you would have to get De Palma and probably the original.
Yes.
But this was a script De Palma owned outright. So no, it's just we had to sign a contract with him. It was his script, which he did sign. So but again, when you ask, does he want to make it? I mean, he's 84, turning 85 this year. And like a lot of these guys, they're still working. And his last film, with Guy Pearce was, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago. Um, I don't know what his thoughts are. I mean, he may still want to make it, or he might just say, that one's an old one. I got new things I want to
Yeah.
do, but I'm happy to have it out there. I guess I mean, that's that's the best, because again, it is difficult because you have to have imagination, which I think you have and I have. Meaning, if you watch De Palma films, I think it's easy to sort of picture what he might do with this script. But obviously, so much of what he does is visual. The script can't give you that whole. I'll use a split diopter here, and I'll have the music playing here. But again, all these Baroque elements. This crime happening while a very eccentric version of Tosca is being done on a stage, and
You can really, I mean, even the
yeah,
dream sequence,
yeah,
everything you can imagine De Palma doing it with reds, with slow motion, with the it's
yeah. No, I
pure.
think that's why I think it definitely reads, and then there is the humor of, while I did find a couple of mentions on the internet back in the day, like, oh, Brad Pitt was being considered for Dr. Wolf, and I guess Madonna, and then Taya Leone was being considered for Christy Rivera. Liam Neeson, I guess, was being considered for the other psychiatrist. I'm forgetting his name for the moment. And Martin Sheen's name was mentioned. So, it's fun enough to read, but the idea is you can really cast it yourself. So if I could see, especially Dr. Wolf, who's kind of a funny character, you could see them going traditional George Clooney. You could see Hugh Grant playing the part, read it and imagine Hugh Grant, dealing with Madonna or something. The fun part of reading it is, in a sense, obviously he would still do some editing, he might change some things, he would drop some things, but what you don't have is things being forced upon him because of the ratings board or because of studio interference or even finances, or Bruce Willis being very difficult on the set of The Bonfire of the Vanities, which I mean, everybody loves Bruce now, but Bruce was a really difficult guy, which people,
Yes.
and in De Palma on De Palma, I'm not making this up. He talks about Bruce directing the other actors, which doesn't strike me as something Brian De Palma really appreciates.
No,
So
yeah,
yeah,
I mean the Julie Salmon book as well, which is just Hollywood gold for everything
right.
wrong with big budget well, old fashioned big budget filmmaking.
Well, it's even like, because I was rereading that just because I got curious again, where Tom Hanks is cast, and Tom Hanks is a good guy, but apparently Tom Hanks didn't want to do it with Uma Thurman, who early on De Palma was interested in for the part Melanie Griffith played. And so apparently Tom Hanks went behind his back and badmouthed her to the studio. Now, again, none of this makes Tom Hanks evil, but I'm just saying, going back to reading this script, none of that's coming into play.
Yeah.
Hanks is a good actor, but he's not nuking the other actress who De Palma wanted. I'm just saying, so if Brian De Palma said, "Oh, I imagined Brad Pitt, Taya Leone, and Liam Neeson are who I have hired for this. Now we can just sort of imagine the actors all showing up in their best form, willing to work." Um, there's nothing perfect in life, but I think on the whole, I mean, De Palma was one of those guys, and I think a lot. I mean, Bogdanovich has several unproduced scripts that he had worked on. It just strikes me that, why not? I mean, it seems unlikely at 85 that if De Palma's going to make something, it's this, because this is a big Mexico City,
Yes.
filming in the opera house,
Which is
filming.
why I think, I mean, you might have more insight into this than I do, but having read it, I can really imagine he's went to a studio, handed in the script, and they went, "Can you not make that in New York? Can you not make it in LA or Boston?" And from my reading of it, because it everything else works, the elements, I imagine it was the Mexican location that probably torpedoed it, because if you remove the Mexico City from it and the Ambrose Chapel aspect, it makes no sense as a film. Even though it could make sense, it would lose that purity of what De Palma wanted to make.
Again, he didn't, in De Palma, he talks about he's fascinated by Mexico City, but I couldn't. And again, I'm happy with this. I think this was, to him, was a very low maintenance thing. He's like, "Hey, you want to publish it?" And then he just okayed things, basically. So it wasn't like he was like, "Let me do a big," he didn't want to do interviews or anything. But that's one reason the book is coming out in record time. That basically, I went to him in February, I think, and the book is being published
That
in
quick?
May. Yeah,
Really?
yeah, yep. Well, I mean, the script was already there, which is a big help. And again, it's a small publisher. It wasn't a big deal. The publisher just basically, so here's a contract. We want to publish it, and um, I will say he did like and compliment my intro, which is a little egocentric, but obviously he had, we did say you have the final okay all over everything. If you want to torpedo this cover, you want to torpedo um, that intro, but he wrote back, "Oh, the intro's great," so that was nice to hear Brian
It was a very good intro, just to blow more smoke.
that. And what's interesting is you might have noticed I had two different. Originally, there was a different cover I was kind of pushing, which was a little more abstract with an eye
Yes.
and a gun. Um, and what happened was, um, I guess my publisher has a designer or somebody who just sort of came up with a cover that's a bit more provocative. It's the cover being used on the book. Um, and so I wrote Brian and I said, "Well, which cover would you prefer?" and he goes and he wrote back and he said, "Oh, I think the first one, it's a little more sleek and elegant." And then he wrote back, he's like, "On second thought, go with the girl with the gun."
Which provocative really does seem like more of a De Palma thing from his
Well, no, I
film.
mean, I think, yeah, I hardly think that this is I mean, it's not really an outrageous cover. It's just an attention getting cover. Um, and I don't think, yeah, De Palma's never been one shy, like to have a provocative image or something, body double or, femme fatale or, so it was just things like that where basically, we did the work and he'd go yes or no. And then, we just say, okay. But, so basically though, to me, it's like it'd be nice if you have more of these voices, whether it's Bogdanovich or Werner Herzog, who's already publishing the series, and I know the publisher's working on even some classic filmmakers who have passed, but he's like talking to some of their estate holders, whoever's in charge of the estate. That I mean, the films aren't going to be made, and I think more and more cultures film savvy, meaning I think people used to read scripts and not really understand how to read them, but I think a lot of people out there kind of know how to read a script now in a sense. And
That, that,
I'd rather, sorry, I just the one that I'd rather have his script than arguably some novel adaptation that was not necessarily in his heart. It was more just like, okay, well, to get this published, I'll turn this into a novel. It's like, no, I mean, he's a filmmaker. Let's see the blueprint for his film as,
well, that's it.
as
I
his.
mean, because you look at most, I mean, the beauty of it is this would have been a mainstream film, whereas mainstream films now, the screenplays, I mean, you hear about this new Avengers film that they haven't locked on a screenplay because they haven't cast and signed the contracts. No one's going to be reading that screenplay, well, even tomorrow or next year when it comes out, or in 20 years' time, because they're not written as screenplays, they're just cobbled together. And I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that just goes back to I don't want to overuse a term, but when you have people who know what they're doing and they write scripts. I mean, like for example, Peter Bogdanovich has a script that was his passion script called "Wait for Me," which he'd been working on for 30 years, but he was still trying to get made when he passed. Like, I mean, when I met him online, he immediately sent me that script. Like, oh yeah, this is the script to read. This is the, um, and I'm like, you know what? I just wish that script would get published because it's like nobody else is going to direct it like Bogdanovich could have directed it. I mean, it was a personal script. I don't know anybody else who's even capable. I don't see any directors out there who understand his style of directing, where they would do it. It would be cut to. It's basically, as far as I'm concerned, She's Funny That Way shows what people think a Bogdanovich film should be cut like, as opposed to Squirrels to the Nuts. So I'm just saying, why not just get the script out so we can just see his vision that he would have then somehow turned into a movie? Because I feel that especially with somebody like De Palma or Bogdanovich, you know, it is a blueprint still. So even if the script's imperfect, I kind of have faith, but they would have pulled it off.
Yeah.
They knew what they want to do, and so um, like in Ambrose Chapel, there's like an exposition scene that goes on for a few pages. I'm like, that's kind of long for a dialogue scene. It reads just fine, but as a movie, but I'm sure, yeah, De Palma either would have trimmed it or maybe rewritten it a little bit, or maybe he had an idea about how to shoot it. Um,
And that's, I mean, you're speaking of that, and there's that famous scene with Tom Cruise and Kittredge in Mission Impossible, where it's pure exposition, and it's basically setting up the movie that's about to be, and that's just done with the angles and everything else and the cross cutting. Whereas, you know, it might seem flat on the page, but he can just bring it, and it looks visually so impressive.
I mean, none of this is official. This is just me talking. I'm like, I'm laughing though because I feel like it wouldn't be the same film. But I'm like, you know what? If Tarantino's having trouble thinking of a of a new script that he actually wants to shoot, I would I would see him taking a crack at this because that's part of why it's like kind of cool if it's published. You see De Palma's script, so you can always go back and see his original intent. But that Tarantino who gets De Palma and does love him, and loves Blowout and all these disreputable films of his. I feel like he's somebody who could maybe do something interesting with this script. So I mean, the idea is I could see it being shot. I just don't, and I don't think the small publication is going to make much of a difference. But on the other hand, having it out there as an official release certainly is going to put it more in as part of society than if it was just a hidden script that was bounced around a little bit in the background. So if it's ever going to get shot, it would be helped by this book being published. Um, but I would assume De Palma, like almost any artist, has projects he's more interested in now anyway, even if he did get the green light that he had. He said in interviews he's working on this, that, and the other thing. And so I just sort of felt, I don't think the script's ever coming out. Why not just put it out and let cineasts enjoy it? Because to me, I mean, De Palma's a legend. I mean, it's huge. It's and to me, this is huge. And to me, meaning it's like how many directors of his level,
Well, to me,
are.
it's for me to be talking to you about a sort of uncovered De Palma screenplay that he's said, yes, you can put it out there, because as film fans, you hear so often about these screenplays that these filmmakers have tried to make for so long that never see the light of day, and suddenly you're presented with it, and you do, like you said, you can visualize it, not to the extent that they would present it to you, but at least you get a flavor of what it is.
Well, it's just we've only had what 3 or 4 De Palma films in the 21st century, and none for 5 or 6 years. So to me, it's like, oh, you probably sort of resolved yourself to maybe De Palma being done at some level, and then voila, here's this script that's pure De Palma, meaning that it's again, and it would be interesting to read something different. But the idea is, no, if you're a De Palma fan, here's one more in his wheelhouse. This is just it's hitting the buttons of what you probably like if you like De Palma films, and yeah, he has a few scripts out there, but again, there are complications. Like, he has a famous script he wrote in the 70s. What is it called? It's not Demolition Man, it's the Demolished Man or something like that. It was based on a science fiction novel. But again, there you have it was based on a novel, and he co-wrote it with John Ferris, who wrote The Fury. So
Right.
again, there's multiple people involved. So I mean, that's a script that I know exists. And then he did a remake of The Treasure of Sierra Madre, which is but it's cocaine instead of money, which from the 1980s, which is great. But again, it's a remake of a film, so you'd have to go and try to find the rights
Yes.
for that. And this is one owned by him outright, I guess, because it wasn't like I was expecting a yes. I just wrote an email because it doesn't hurt anything to try, and it took him a few weeks to write back, which is his prerogative. So I was just assuming it was forgotten or ignored, and but then one morning he wrote like, sure,
And does he
and
have? Are there other ones that he owns, screenplays that he owns that you could publish, or is this a one-off just because
I
everything else
assume
is
it's a
remakes?
one-off.
Or
I'm not trying to be. I'm just saying, a small publishing house putting out a script. I don't know if he's sitting here saying, "Let me be," publish the next 14. I just don't. I don't know, and I wouldn't push it. Meaning, the difference was, although it's funny, I had a copy of this script, um, so at some level he didn't have to do much work. Although then he did email me. He did apparently have his own. He emailed me his copy of it to compare and this and that. But again, it's almost like if I wrote him and said, "Hey, Brian, I read, you wrote a script once about blah blah blah. Could we maybe publish it?" That's already making him do work. He has to go dust it off if he
well, so
has it.
is he sending you scans of the original typewritten, or they? What's he sending you?
I've gotten a copy of the script, and I said I read this. It was really good. I think it should be uh, published. And he said, great. And then he just sent me a PDF. I guess he'd already just had it on his computer or something like that. But it was basically the same draft I had. It was more he was just trying to confirm we had the same draft. So he sent that to me, but that was yeah, there was no big reveal. He had no material that was like, oh, this is something I haven't seen. It was pretty much the same draft I had, with I think it had some of that Paris, Mexico City messiness. It was more prevalent, maybe even in his copy of the script, I think. But yeah, no. So I'm just happy that somehow, but I mean, by doing the right thing, in a sense, by trying to, help out Bogdanovich and things like that, it just sort of led to me, um, getting to meet Bogdanovich, getting to meet, via email Brian De Palma, and do something that made him happy. And uh, it's smaller, but there's a musician named Marshall Crenshaw who's a cult artiste. You might know him best. He played Buddy Holly in La Bamba, the movie La
Right.
Bamba. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, but he's like a New York based, artist who his debut album is one of the 500 best albums of the 1980s, according to Rolling Stone. So he's out there. Where I actually got my hands on some DAT audio tapes of an album he made in 1989. So it had all these different mixes and had a song that was never released anywhere that he even forgot about. And so again, all these emails begin with, "I'm the guy who saved the Bogdanovich thing." So I do have this credibility that allows, I
Is
guess.
that now something? I'm not saying that you're leaning into, but are you? on the lookout for lost stuff, or are you
Well,
reading up on
always-
things that you've remembered that you want to see the light of day, or
I mean,
how's that working?
I mean, a couple of things. In other words, I'm actually always on the lookout for oddball things, that weren't made or weren't released, and obviously with certain filmmakers, for one guy it might be Scorsese or Lynch, or another guy, but for me, Bogdanovich and De Palma, I would love to get my hands on anything they ever thought they might want to make and check it out. But I was looking up Marshall Crenshaw just to see if there was anything cool to get on eBay for myself, and I saw all these DAT tapes, and they were like $90. I'm like, well, that's not too bad for unreleased alternate mixes that we've never seen the light of day, including songs I'd never heard of. And um, so no, I wouldn't say it's official, other than the one difference was with, I think I mentioned with you, when I heard about the G. Malik Linton, which I didn't discover. I knew there was a director's cut out there. I did say, well, my credibility with the Bogdanovich would perhaps allow me to get this thing screened, and so I wrote him, and sure enough, he responded, I guess, because of that credit. And then when I wrote, well, no, it was simpler than that. I forgot. Yeah, no, the Wisconsin Film Festival is run by a guy who had screened Squirrels to the Nuts, so I'd already made that connection, and so he set that up. So I'd be happy, as I said when I announced the De Palma thing. My friend on Blue Sky said, "You're not a film historian, you're a film archaeologist," and I'm like, okay, I'll use that term, but I'm going to put quotes around archaeologist before somebody punches me, because it's pretentious, but it is. I have been uncovering oddball things and getting them higher profiles and getting them out there, which I'm happy to do. And as I said, uh, there's a script by a very cool guy, which we're hoping to get published, but it does go back again to making sure that that his widow has the rights, that it wasn't sold to some producer or something like that, where
Right.
there's somebody else who could step in. So I mean, I'm putting in the hours, because for this script we're trying to figure that out. We're doing the chain of ownership or whatever the term is, and trying to figure it out. But so I guess the
How
more
much
I
work to do something like that? Is there? I mean, with even the De Palma thing, do you have to roll your sleeves up and get into that yourself, or how does
well, no,
it?
I mean, maybe, I think no, that was be more my publisher, I guess. But it's also just, hey, De Palma said it was his script, and he signed the contract. It's like, well, if it was his script. I mean, and it was a film that was never made. So I would imagine 30 years later, a guy like him would have the rights reverted to him. It's not like a first time screenwriter where you might get screwed with some eternal contract or something. Um, but as I said, when it comes to cruising, I don't care that Brian De Palma wrote it. He doesn't have the rights to it. I think 30, 40 years later, 45 years later for that one, maybe 50 years later for that one, because it's just a project that he didn't originate. So for the current one, it's not that it's so tricky. It's just more we're talking to the widow to try to determine, well, who does she think might have the rights to the script. And
Yes,
um,
a chain of evidence, and sort of go back as far as you can possibly go.
I mean, I'm not romanticizing. I'm not like knee deep in some sewer, pulling out catacombs trying to find. It was more just like, hey, let's publish this, and it wasn't an immediate yes, because we just got to figure out who's who's behind it. But yeah, the publisher. I mean, it's again. I don't have financial stake in this publisher, but Sticking Place Books is putting out a lot of good stuff. I mean, they did put out the translation of De Palma on De Palma, which is a book length interview.
Yes.
Um, and as is often the case, I think because it was a French book originally, it's been translated back into English. I think sometimes these filmmakers are looser lipped when they talk to the French than when they talk in America.
Yes, I think, but I mean, De Palma, going back to that documentary that was made a few years back, he seems to be looking retrospectively back on his career, and possibly because he's always had a bit of a rough time with Hollywood. Every time he's been up, the next thing he did always sort of knocked him down. So is he? And again, maybe this came through in an email or just your personal opinion. Do you feel he's slightly more relaxed with the past and his career and how he's looking back on it?
No strong, I mean, strongly supported opinion. Meaning I could say something now, but it'd be more me just. In other words, he seemed pretty chill about this project, and it may just simply be, as I said, well, he's over 80. He might just be like, "Hey, get it out, and maybe he liked the idea of a small publisher because it's like, yeah, get it out soon, as opposed to me.
Yeah,
I'm
four
85. Let's
years.
not take 5 years for this. And then C, without romanticizing it, maybe he just did like my email in a sense, meaning maybe he said, okay, this guy just seems to be a straight enough shooter who wants to do something decent, because one thing I would assume is that, and it has not so much to do with me anyway, is that he's never had much of an interest in Hollywood BS, in a sense, and that's why sort of, why he did the long interview with the people, the De Palma net people back in 2000. It was Mission to Mars, actually. That was the film where he skipped the junkets, but he did the interview with the independent site. Um, Beyond that, because I feel, without knowing, I think Redacted hurt his career a lot more than it should have, because he made a film that was directly critical. In a sense, it was sort of audacious. He's kind of remaking Casualties of War when he makes
Yes.
Redacted, but I think he was again, as an artist, he's like, I'm not trying to do this to be commercial. I'm trying to say the more things change, the more they stay the same. Um, and then when he produced it, I guess Mark Cuban, who's a pretty famous guy and a millionaire, billionaire dude, produced it for HD Net Movies, was a channel. And I think it goes back to, hey, we got De Palma willing to do this low budget film, awesome. And they didn't quite understand what he was making, and then when he made it, it got suppressed. And of course, Fox News was calling him a traitor and this and that. And I think that hurt him, because all his films since then have been shot in Europe, Passion and um, Domino. So
Domino.
I'm just wondering if he became like too hot for Hollywood. It's like, well, he's a high maintenance, famous director who doesn't necessarily guarantee box office and doesn't necessarily do whatever we say. Um, well, I don't. Well, a person like Tony Scott is was much more commercially minded, and his brain was probably more attuned to what Jerry Bruckheimer wants than what Brian De Palma would do. And so I think maybe Redacted might have really been the one where they just said, okay,
And
uh,
that's, I think Redacted was, I think, released at the wrong, sort of made or released at the wrong time, because I think probably 3 years the other side of when it came out, it probably would have been received much better, from my opinion.
yeah. To me, it's an interesting film that um, gets extremely little spoken about it, considering it's made by Brian De Palma, the most famous filmmakers of the second half of the 20th century in America. And I think it's an uncomfortable film that doesn't. It's sort of like, oh wait, see, I kind of felt with Scorsese. That when he made Casino, I kind of felt Scorsese understood, as brilliant as Goodfellas is, I can see why some people kind of romanticize it, like, hey, I want to be those guys. Because in Casino, it's like, it's such a dour, disturbing film. It's like these people are miserable. They're horrible
Yeah.
people who are miserable. And when he kills them off, they die really slow, painful deaths, in Casino. And I kind of felt like it was like, in its own way, Scorsese, the Irishman even continued this. Hey, you know, it's not glamorous. These old, decrepit people, who are living with borrowed time. And what I'm getting at is, in Casualties of War, you still have, with a $30 million budget or whatever, you certainly have a protagonist you can side with. Michael J. Fox is a good person who
Yes.
you're rooting for, and in a sense, he gets. We see he survived the incident. You have the flash, no, the flashback. It's taking place in San Francisco, and he sees the girl who reminds him of the girl who was killed and raped. Whereas Redacted, while Redacted, it doesn't give you much of anything to hang on, other than bad things will happen and the media will manipulate, and so I'm not sure it ever would have been accepted. Your point is valid enough, meaning it was very raw to do that in the middle of the whole.
Yeah. No, I think, having said that, none of those movies that came out after that, even The Hurt Locker, made money. They were all pretty unsuccessful.
Yeah, no, and Redacted has no famous actors in it. Casualties of War is funny because yeah, you do recognize that for some strange reason, the majority of these really dark Vietnam films did pretty well. The Full Metal Jacket and Platoon and The Deer Hunter all made reasonable money. Um, and then Hamburger Hill didn't, but I guess it wasn't quite. But I think there was maybe a thought that that Casualties of War could make money because of Platoon and Full Metal Jacket.
Yes, it just felt at the end of the, again, I think if that had have been released 3 years before,
Yeah,
the,
no, that's one where I think you're right. At the end of the cycle, it's
yeah.
almost like, okay, we're sick of flagellating ourselves over Vietnam, and we're and more we're entering the Tony Scott Days of Thunder, Top Gun era, where
Yeah,
it's not
because
like
even,
these.
when did Born on the Fourth of July come out? That was,
Yeah, that's a good point. No, I think that was around the time of Casualties of War. That might
yeah,
have been 89 or 88, and that was a bit of a hit. That
yeah,
was Tom Cruise among other things, but But I mean, Cash is War is an even bleaker film, though. I mean, for all that happens to Cruise's character, he comes out the other end, and he's a successful protester who lives.
Yeah, but I think
Yeah,
I mean the target audience of a Michael J. Fox film probably isn't your
yeah,
Vietnam rip
yeah.
drama. you know?
No, no. I mean, Sean Penn obviously had a history, was doing
Yeah,
serious dramas, but he wasn't necessarily box office. In a sense that the idea was. And this is what I said is I feel De Palma gets slagged way too much. Like, oh, he's cruel. I'm like, he's not cruel. He just knows how to make movies so you actually feel
yeah.
something. And the whole point is, why should you watch A Dress to Kill and not feel bad for Angie Dickinson? There's something wrong if you don't feel bad for Angie Dickinson.
That's the
And,
thing.
and
Yeah,
yeah, and blow. Yeah, please. Yeah,
I mean, Blowout. I mean, that's my favorite De Palma. I think
yeah,
if I had to sort of,
yeah.
and it's just everything about it from the opening, which you know, quote unquote, is your typical sleaze De Palma intro where you get what you think you're getting.
Right, right.
Then the ending, which is incredibly heartfelt because of how that ties to the beginning. I think it's powerful stuff.
And it's, I mean, but whether Carrie, which of course. Is it cruel? Well, it's cruel because he actually makes you really feel, and him and Sissy Spacek working together. Of course, you feel for Carrie. So even as you know where the film's going, you're practically begging, oh please, actually the problem's working out nicely. Just
Yes. I,
and so the idea, it's like, well, okay, you feel bad when the violence begins. Well, maybe that's better than Friday the 13th, where you're rooting for the kills and things like that. I mean, Halloween, I think, is another example where Carpenter at his best. You like all those characters in Halloween. It's like that kind of film. There has to be a body count, but you're not rooting for PJ Souls or Nancy Loomis to get. You feel you're rooting for all of them to somehow live, even though it's inevitable they can't. And I'm just saying, so De Palma, I think, might be the best at that. Just as making films where you know you're so wrought up because, as you say, you're passively watching as film forces you to do, so you're helpless. And so Carlito's way, where he even softens the blow by telling you at the beginning of the film, no, he's dead.
yeah.
He just got shot. This is not. But in the end, you're just like, no, go left. You can make. If you
Yeah.
use those stairs, maybe. Um, and but Carlito's way is so powerful because it's you're watching a man sort of review his life knowing he's screwed up, knowing he's doomed, and it's led to this moment. Um, and this is just stuff most filmmakers aren't capable of pulling off, and that's why I kind of feel sometimes when people are anti De Palma, and this goes back to people I respect, Andrew Sarris, and I mean, I kind of agree with Pauline Kael, who sometimes said, "Well, people just, because she liked The Eyes of Laura Mars, which was the Irvin Kershner film, and she loved
Yes.
The Fury, and she loved Carrie, and she loved Dress to Kill, and Sam Peckinpah, and I kind of agree with that, where it's like these if they make you wince, they're doing something right." and so I think, I think some of the critics may have been conservative, like in other words. I love Giallo films, I love Dario Argento and all this and that. Um, whereas I think some people, came to it and they recoiled from the violence that clearly De Palma um, used for effect and enjoyed. I'm sure the same way I enjoy the films too. I mean, when I watch a Argento or a De Palma film, I certainly love the violent set pieces for their intensity and imagination and color. But I'm still completely unhappy for Angie Dickinson. It's like one of
No,
the
but
first
that
half hour Dress to Kill is such a masterpiece, and it
yeah,
builds to this,
that's and again a film that would never be made today in any way,
I
shape, or
guess
form.
not. I mean, I mean, sometimes I always say because sometimes a film will surprise you, like how it gets made if you get the right actor agreeing to do it or something. But on the whole, yes, you wouldn't see. Um,
A 50-year-old Oscar winner.
Yeah, well, no,
you
no,
know,
no. Well, I mean, again, a gorgeous one, but I sort of feel that like it's to me it's like comedy because when people say it's so cruel, but it's like empathy, like all of us feel guilty when we do the wrong thing and we wonder we're going to be punished for it. So when she finds out that he has venereal disease, the guy she's I'm like it's just playing upon what you're worried about. Guess what? You're right. This kind of thing could happen, and then she forgets her wedding ring, and it's just this is all stuff you can empathize with. It's just like, oh my gosh, and I feel like people just often misread it because they're being distracted or confused by the violence, or they're angry at him for making them feel. And I just sort of feel like, I mean, how can you say the guy who makes Casualties of War or Redacted, the violence is drawn out in those films, but I wouldn't say he's on the side of it. It's like he's making you miserable. He's trying to
Well,
make
I
you.
mean, they're pretty miserable films. But I think what people also don't realize is he's got such a mastery of cinema and how cinema plays with emotion and these aspects that I think a lot of filmmakers do not have that skill and that understanding of the art form. And I think De Palma, I mean, going back to the movie Brats of the 70s, is he the one that really understood? And again, this is there's no right or wrong answer here, but does he understand cinema and the playfulness of it more than anyone else? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, see, in certain ways, I feel, yeah, I mean, because I mean, obviously Scorsese knows cinema inside out, and I keep going back to personal favorites, but I feel like Bogdanovich and De Palma are like two sides of the same coin because Bogdanovich has this voyeuristic streak too. I mean, they all laughed at the men walking around the streets, watching the women walking around the streets, and the women watching the men, um, and like to me, They All Laughed and Dressed to Kill, which were made the same year, are kind of similar except for the violence. That they're both of these New York City films, and it's sort of like this. De Palma showing you the worst of New York. You can't get on a subway without a gang trying to attack you while you're running from a murderer. Whereas They All Laughed is you can't go around a street corner without somebody new falling in love with you. So they're different, but I feel like no, I think a lot of them understood. I mean, I think Scorsese, De Palma, and Bogdanovich are more cinematic or more cinema savvy than you could say controversially, but like Coppola or Lucas or Spielberg. I guess it's sort of a loaded because they all obviously know more than anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying none of them are talented, but I think there's a
But I feel like with De Palma and Bogdanovich and Scorsese, it's like you can get lost in the movie, but you can also step back and watch it and just see how the filmmaker is using cinema um, to manipulate and appreciate it. I mean, it's certainly true, I guess. I mean, see, again, this is sort of controversial, but this is where I'm perverse, I guess. It's like for me, Spielberg was wonderful. I mean, almost perfect up to Temple of Doom, and then there was that weird part. I don't weird, but he started becoming more self conscious about, oh, I'm going to make The Color Purple. I'm going to make Empire of the Sun, and these are going to show I'm a serious filmmaker. And I love Empire of the Sun. I don't love Color of Purple. I do like Empire of the Sun. Um, but I felt like at a certain point, for example, the John Williams scores for him up to maybe okay, I'll include Jurassic Park are tremendous, and then I find after a while it just to me they're ladled on a lot. Like I'm not thrilled. Like
yes.
literally, there's no shot of Tom Hanks that won't have a John Williams score blasting over it in
I think
uh,
Spielberg became very, and again, I still think you see him making movies, or you see the choices he's making rather than the movie he's making. From my
yeah,
perspective,
good point. Yeah, that's what I
you
sort
know,
of good way to put it. That this is the one. I mean, and this is because he's a great filmmaker. I mean, to be yeah, I think Munich is great. I think people misunderstand how good the movie is in a sense because again, it's an
except that sex scene, which should never have been in the film. But anyway, that's by the by.
that's what I don't remember now. I don't remember what was sexy.
It's a ridiculous 15 seconds of. I'm thinking Eric Bana with like sweaty, wet hair, or it's just very bad.
Oh,
That's
okay,
my.
you know what? Block that out of my mind. It's probably been a decade since I saw the film. I mean, here we're just having conversations, not really necessarily leading anywhere, other than just. I mean, one reason may be he's had a lot more opportunity to make films because he's successful. But I feel like Ready Player One, you feel like here he's trying to show he's still relevant with certain things,
Yes.
and West Side Story is a very good movie, but here I'm going to make my musical, and it's sort of self conscious in a way. But I love Munich. I love Catch Me If You Can, and I'm sure I'm forgetting.
Minority Report, I think, which I watched again recently, is great.
Minority Report is one of the ones though where I feel whether he's self conscious or not, I do feel that film goes on half an hour too long. That it has that kind of natural ending, and then it
It's
becomes this thing where his wife is investigating.
Yes, it's a film without a last act, or at the very least, an ending that ties it up succinctly. I think there's definitely a
And so
meander.
just because people are going to say, "Well, De Palma made this that sucks," which fair, fair. I'm just saying that for me, De Palma, I guess maybe for certain cinema goers, like for me, Bogdanovich and De Palma are speaking directly to me, and I just sort of feel like even so, I get them, and even when they mess up, I get what they were trying to go for, and I'm always feeling, sort of, and like so, Domino, which a lot of people slagged, I'm just like, there's so much good stuff in it. There's just the apples, and then this and that, and then
I've
the
I've
dark
I've
humor.
seen you talk about Domino online recently, and I really need to revisit because
Guy
I
Pearce is
enjoyed the
great in that movie.
aspects, but I remember, and I think at the time he came out and said that it wasn't his vision because he ran out of money or there was some issue, and I think that impacted my viewing of it as an audience
Yeah.
member. So,
See, I actually fought. Not, I mean, it's correct, but I fought against it. And I think people. I remember being one of the people on Twitter. I mean, there's different types of. In other words, I don't think the film was taken away from him or recut like She's Funny that way. I think De Palma's used to working at a certain level with a certain amount of money, with a certain amount of this and that, and he didn't get it, and that aggravated him. But like because I was running around reading all those interviews and the translations, he did it, and none of them did it say the film was taken away from him. He was just bitching about people not getting paid, about this and about that. So I feel that with limitations, it's the film he made. Whereas She's Funny that
mm.
way is not the film Peter Bogdanovich made of Squirrels to the Nuts. Um, but again, that's where like you're saying, okay, this film is made for $8 million or whatever, and shot in Amsterdam, or I don't remember where it was shot down. And then you just see how he's working in those parameters, and then I just feel there's I mean, the whole thing where the partner is clearly just unhappy in his marriage. He's just the first half. It's just these scenes of the wife oblivious to this, and the partner just sighing and rolling his eye. I mean, it's just stuff to me again where it's very funny in a dark way. Like I feel his sense of humor is still working there, where it's sort of um. And so I'm not saying it's a 4-star movie. What I'm saying though is to me though, it's just there's a lot of De Palma in it,
Oh yeah, I
and
mean,
that's
I
why.
remember that's my big takeaway that it, even though I didn't, not that I didn't enjoy it, but although I didn't think it was
Yeah.
prime De Palma, I still enjoyed it, and sort of I'd rather watch him make something mediocre. What was the quote that you said earlier?
Yeah, a souffle that doesn't rise completely, as opposed to just some cheap store bought, the apple pie or whatever. But yeah, no, the last thing would just be that he um that I think there's also impossible expectations. Like every time, it's like it's so rare he gets a movie out. So when Passion came out, it's like, oh my gosh, finally De Palma made something and got pretty mediocre reviews. And I think Passion's kind of nuts in a cool, and I'm like, Rachel McAdams in this erotic De Palma thriller. And it's like the meeting of two worlds. And then Domino, again, you come and you're like, okay, it's Brian De Palma. So part of you just has Carrie and Dress to Kill. And it's not because I don't think the film fails. I think the film's limited by a budget of a sort. Um, but it's such an eccentric movie. I mean, and again, it's and Guy Pearce is brilliant in that movie. He just comes in and you can tell, no, he's for real. He's taking this seriously.
Mhm.
Um, and but all that being said, just to tie it back to our, you'll edit out all the nonsense. Is going back to Ambrose Chapel. That's why it's interesting because no, you have him back to where he was A-list, where he's
Yeah.
writing a script coming off of Carlito's Way, and even if he'd had a flop here or there, he was still Brian De Palma working with Al Pacino, working with Bruce Willis, working with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery. So when the script was bandied about, people like Brad Pitt and Madonna were names were tossed around, and for whatever reasons, it wasn't made. Whether because of Hollywood was already shifting a little bit, and perhaps the idea of this sort of strange convoluted baroque erotic thriller, just he couldn't get funding for it. Um, uh, I just think it's going to be a hoot for a lot of people because, like, the script is not worried about he's got $6 million from Grindstone Entertainment, to make
Yes.
something shot in Romania, because even as much as I love De Palma, there's a point I made once, where Bruce Beresford, I guess the Australian director, if I'm mispronouncing his last name, who made Driving Miss Daisy, and he made a movie with Morgan Freeman and John Cusack in Romania, I guess in
The
Bucharest, during this
contract,
period.
wasn't it? Yeah.
The Contract, that was
Yeah.
the title. Uh, and I remember thinking Beresford, who's not De Palma's equal as a director, he's a proficient director, but I thought he did a really good job of faking the U.S. Like I was like, okay, no, the way the setups, the angles, what he's doing. I remember Black Dahlia when I'm watching the police station scene, and I'm like, other than Josh Hartnett and Aaron Eckhart, this is a rather swarthy Los Angeles place. They all had dark hair, beards. And I felt like you could tell this was shot in Romania, that it wasn't,
That's what put me off that movie as well. I was the same. I was like, yeah, it doesn't quite work for me.
but it was also, that's where the frustration were, obviously by that point, you had to go where the money was, and you could fund a film. I mean, and so I mean, the film had a little bit of shooting in LA. To be fair, it wasn't entirely shot, but a majority of it was shot in Bucharest, and I felt like the extras felt very Romanian to
Yeah.
me. And so I just remember at the time saying The Contract, which is not a better film than The Black Dahlia, but I wanted to give Beresford credit, saying no, but he understood the issue of shooting an American film in Romania, and seemed to work harder to try to have extras that looked
But
American.
the Black Dahlia, that was sort of shot at the last minute. That was bumped from, that was supposed to be LA, wasn't it? Or at the very least the US somewhere. And I think,
You're right. I mean, there's LA stuff. They definitely shot by the
yeah.
Silver Lake and all this and that. But again, so you're probably right. I mean, it's probably one of these 21st century issues where they're just running around trying to get the money at the last second. So that might, again, De Palma's king and Beresford isn't. So it doesn't really impact. My problem with the Black Dahlia is just there's a lot of exposition, which is not what he's usually interested in.
Well, that's
And
it.
I
But I
remember,
mean, the book is so dense, the Black Dahlia.
yeah,
That's that.
and I feel like by the end of the film, I'm forgetting her name. Is it the Irish actress who plays the mother, Hilary Swank's mother, Fiona something, or she's
Shaw,
famous?
Fiona Shaw.
Perhaps that's
Yeah.
probably it. I mean, I'm probably wrong. I mean, I just don't remember. But I remember, she had, it's like the typical murder mystery where she has like a 10-minute speech where she's explaining like why all these people have been killed. And I just felt it wasn't playing, to his strong hand, because in a sense he's never been wildly interested in that. He likes,
No.
but again, like a lot of things, though, it's sort of like the Impossible Expectations. When I went back and watched it, because this year, having this positive experience, I just felt kind of pro De Palma, so I'm watching all these movies. It played better now than it did when I first saw it, because again, it's sort of like, well, I'm not looking for this to be the latest De Palma masterpiece. It's sort of, I think I don't know if I've said this to you, but it's sort of like if you look at Paul McCartney's career or something like that, I can understand when Wildlife or McCartney 2 came out, while some critics were like, "Oh my God, what is this? What is Paul doing?" But the idea is, after 60 years, when you have a lot of other albums and you realize, so this wasn't like a new direction in his career; it was like a one-off. So it's like,
Yeah.
you want to go hear McCartney do synthesizing music, you listen to McCartney 2.
That's it. Suddenly, Temporary Secretary doesn't seem that bad. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and but I'm saying, but when it's new, you're worried. Like, oh my gosh, what direction is this career
Yeah.
going in? As my hero, so it's one of these things where it's not quite the same. But I'm saying Black Dahlia to me was like a 2.5-star film with some interesting elements. Which obviously, for a guy who's made a lot of 4-star films, I wasn't, official. But going back, I'm like, it's De Palma doing a classic film noir murder mystery, which he otherwise never did. So I find it kind of interesting to watch it, just as an example of that. But yeah, but just with the Ambrose Chapel, I think, um, to me, it's really sort of like, you can see where it's between Raising Cain, which has mixed responses. Although again, it cracks me up, especially with the cut. Have you watched the cut that's on the? If you The story was his original version, they was not chronological, and he shifted something. I'm
I
trying to
haven't.
remember.
No.
Well, the Shout Factory, the Scream Factory Blu-ray release, apparently some fan went back and cut it the way De Palma originally had cut it before. I don't want to say he lost his nerve, but before it got released, they just said, "Oh," and they sort of released it. And it's very different chronology. There's no extra footage. It's just moving things around. And De Palma found out about it. And this is what I mean, where he supports the little guy, and he said, apparently he contacted them and said, "Tell Shout Factory I want that cut on the Blu-ray, and give them my number if they need to talk to me." So De Palma was completely supportive of it. So on the Blu-ray release, there are 2 cuts: the theatrical and the fan cut, though, which is based on De Palma's original screenplay and the way he wanted to originally cut it. So next time you get a chance, watch that version, because
I
that's
will
the
be
one.
seeking that out just to, yeah, bit of
You know,
homework.
and and um and again, I mean, it just cracks me up. It's just sort of like, you're on the wavelength or not. I mean, again, there is something Baroque, which I love. It's just not another generic, so Ambrose Chapel, I'm just saying, does definitely go out there a little bit, in a sense. It's sort of like to me, it's like, well, wait, okay, it starts off, it's an international thriller with, with like, CIA operatives stealthily, but then next thing you know, it's in Mexico and it's a woman with dreams. And then next thing we know, there's a president of the United States is showing. It's sort of like a kitchen sink type thing. Like you feel like he's having some of that fun he sort of had in Raising Cain, where it's like,
It is, and
I'm
also the fact that of the love of film and Hitchcock. I mean, he's bringing those elements in.
That's what I mean. It's like when she starts talking about this vague dream she has, and Nick is like, "Wait, I think I'm aware." And with the symbols, that sounds familiar to me. But then by the time you have that sequence, which cracks me up because might be the funniest thing he ever wrote. It's like really, I mean, I don't want to give it away, but it's just the idea of like, one of the key set pieces is totally predicated on the main male character not knowing how to work a remote control. Like he's pushing all these buttons. Next thing you know, the woman is on the street with a gun in her hand, doing things based on. I mean, that to me is just so. It is very funny, overtly comic. Um, and so it tells me that he was in a pretty good mood when he was putting this thing together.
You know,
Um,
he was definitely in a playful mood. And I think that sort of strikes me from the beginning of it, because you can see him going into the almost Mission Impossible mode from the beginning, and then working his way through to the end, where it's, spoiler alert, a happy ending. Which is
yeah, no, which was relatively uncommon. I mean, again, you can see things like, I mean, again, a budget might have been involved, but still, like something like Snake Eyes, which I think is a very Brian De Palma film. The idea, Nicolas Cage's career may have been ruined, but his soul was saved, and he's got the girl kind of at the end. In the sense, it's not Blowout where the man has just screwed everything up and he's just listening to a tape of the dead girl's scream over and over again, which is about as despairing an ending as you can get.
can you dig out the original version of Snake Eyes with the big ending and the way it was supposed to be, or
Well, I
is
posted the
that?
endings on YouTube. I've posted that ending on YouTube. It's
I've
it's
seen
there.
it, but I can't imagine how it all fits together. Or maybe I'm just.
Well, no, that's where I think De Palma see that there are different, because every interview I read with De Palma now indicates that he wasn't forced on him. He thought the original ending didn't work, so the new ending is his ending. He doesn't want the original ending stuck back on it. So that's a little different than if a film has been yanked from
Right.
somebody's. He said it was the sort of the hand of God thing, where the all these venal people in Atlantic City who are all sinners and are washed. No, the flood comes in and floods everybody out, and I think Gary Sinise is dragged away in the flood or something like that. And I think he said no, it didn't work, and that's it didn't work. It was too. I don't want to put words in his mouth now if I'm forgetting, but whether it was too metaphorical as opposed to direct or something like that. So I've seen the ending, and it doesn't. But that's what I'm saying. It doesn't seem to hang together. But maybe that's true. Maybe it
Yeah.
didn't hang together. and um, but Snake Eyes is another one that I just think people are kind of. And I'm like, I watched that film. I'm like, man. I mean, Nicolas Cage is great in that film. I mean, it's just like
He just takes it to the edge of being over the top, and then he reins it in.
well, and it's just every one of his line readings to me is the perfect line reading. It's like you're just laughing, like I'm cracking up. And then some people complain about the showing off of the opening sequence, but I'm like, I mean, again, De Palma is like Bogdanovich, and I say that because I think they're a little more like this than even some of the brilliant brethren of that era, is that he doesn't talk down to you and he expects you to pay attention. And he's like, you came here, pay attention to this and see if you can figure it out. So the whole idea of the one shot that begins, Snake Eyes, like the
Yeah.
first 15 minutes, it's like the whole rest of the movie is going to be this Rashomon thing with different angles and different takes. It's like, no, he's giving you this relatively objective viewpoint of everything that's happening. And you watch it again and again, you realize it's all like in the corner of shots or characters who later on are going to be important. And like, oh, I didn't think that person was so important, but now I see she's doing that thing that's going to be key later. To me, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah, no, I think it's vastly
It's like
underrated.
it, it's captivating, and it's just like it is bravura, because as opposed to Bonfire of the Vanities, which I find interesting things about it, that opening shot is a technical feat. But I feel Snake Eyes, it's more inherent to the story he's telling, that this shot, here is this one take, because from the rest of the movie, we're going to be telling this story from 48 different perspectives. Bonfire of the Vanities, which I appreciate, again, there's a lot of good stuff. That shot is amazing. But again, it's sort of, what exactly is it? It's focusing on not even the main character. It's focusing on Bruce Willis just sort of roaming around being
Yes.
drunk.
And I think what works for Snake
You know, and
Eyes,
so
it's the
but
confidence of a man who's just made Mission Impossible. You know, he's going in and going, I can just do it, and I'm not worried about how it goes, or you know, it's just like I'm a filmmaker. I've got the money. I've got the big
yeah.
star. I'm doing what I want.
Well, that's what I mean. I think that's where I also feel like where Dress to Kill was his project, but it was a hit. So Blowout, he's like, I'm doing what I want, and it's a very dark film. Untouchables is a hit. He doesn't try to make Untouchables 2. He makes Casualties of War. Mission Impossible is a hit. Now, Snake Eyes, you might argue, is the most commercial of those follow-ups, but it's still, to me, a very Brian De Palma film, and it's pretty dark because it's about a guy who basically has to destroy his own life to do the right thing. He has to destroy his whole career and basically arrest or kill his best friend to do the right thing. And then the irony is, yes, he's a decent enough person. He's like, no, I got to do the right thing. So that's, I mean, I'm just saying, I think at some level, it wasn't as commercial. I mean, it should have been a bigger hit, but,
Yeah,
you know,
it did all right. I mean, I think it probably cost more than it probably should have, but what did it do? 60, 70 million US, something like
I
that?
mean, he got Mission to Mars after that, so obviously he wasn't in a doghouse. I think
No.
there's those various levels. Like if you make a movie and it doesn't make its money back, but it makes a certain amount, Hollywood's like, okay, in a sense, we'll let you keep working in a sense. But um, well, that's where, just because we're sort of talking, I don't know how much, but Mission to Mars, of course, as we see now, is officially really the end of his Hollywood career. The last film in Hollywood, and it's a film again where I think, looking back, I enjoy it more than maybe I enjoyed it. Sometimes the expectations and some so in other words, you want, and there's these bravura sequences. I mean, Tim Robbins' death sequence, and then the sequence with just where they're playing Dance the Night Away and they're running around it's beautifully shot stuff. Um, but as De Palma's made clear in interviews, I think he was growing to hate modern Hollywood filmmaking. He's like, all these computer things I have to do. Like he was saying, like every shot I had to, it was the most boring thing on earth. I mean, he was very loud about it. And so I think you could just feel he's like, no, I'm not, this is not my world anymore, and
Yeah. And it really is an outlier for his career. You know, the science fiction, the big budget, even Mission Impossible, you look at it, it's a 60s spy thriller just wrapped up in a 90s action movie, but that just stands out as a weird film for him. But maybe it was the opportunity to play with those toys and realize you don't like them.
got the chance and said, I don't like this.
Yeah.
I mean, De Palma, I mean, he seems like he was enthusiastic because apparently he's not a science fiction guy. He said, I'm not into science fiction, but there was that one script in the 70s, which it's called The Demolished Man or The Destructed Man or something, that he wrote with John Ferris. And he's like, well, that was science fiction. It was based on a book he loved as a teenager. And then this, he said, reminded him of and that's one reason I think it's like he wanted to make an optimistic film. It's not like I'm Brian De Palma, I must make this bleak and dark. It was like, no, this is a film that reminds me of the sci-fi I did like as a teenager. So I'm going to do a big Hollywood version of that. Um, and I think it left people curious, just because it ends kind of strangely, and So I'm not sure. I mean, do you like Mission to Mars or?
Not overly. I haven't said that. I haven't watched it in 20 years or whatever, so it probably, off the back of reading this and sort of a few things you've tweeted out, I'm going to
Go
revisit
look
a
at
lot
some
of
of
the
these
stuff that
things.
I didn't necessarily like.
Yeah, I know. I mean, to me, I have to watch it again because I saw it 20 years ago, and then one of the streaming Fandango or something like that was selling it for $5 HD. So I did buy the stream because I'm like, well, for $5 I'll own a De Palma even if I end up later. So I watched the first 20 minutes of it. I'm like, so I got to watch the whole thing again and see what was it that bugged me the first time because I'm sure it still might show up. But it's just I think again too in the rear view I'm watching it. I'm like, well, this is not necessarily the type of film I gravitate towards, but I'm like, man, this is made by somebody who knows how to make movies in the way that I understand.
It's not a Marvel film, which is
Well,
the
yeah,
key.
and it's
Yeah.
it's just like the opening sequence again is a one shot around this party, this barbecue. The camera's just following the characters around, and then every time there's a cut, you can justify it. It's not just attention deficit cutting, in a sense. And so I find myself, I think, much warmer towards the film than maybe I was when I first was sort of like, this isn't my thing. And but again, nobody's saying he's perfect. I just think that in a sense, we do have so few precious natural resources, and this is one of the all-time great
Yeah.
filmmakers.
No, I
and,
agree.
yeah, and so it was. I don't want to say it was divine, right? I don't want, I'm making a joke, meaning that I just got my hands on the script. And if I could bottle this, it would be awesome. But I think it was a pretty unique thing that somehow I got my hands on the script. I was able to get his email, which was hard. It's like nobody's like, I wrote him 2 weeks later. He's like, yeah, okay. I wouldn't recommend this at home as a plan or anything like that.
But hey, if it works.
Well, yeah, no, that's what and then yeah, and then basically this is not a slight. In other words, knowing his reputation, I didn't attempt to be like, hey, let's barbecue someday. Tell me what Bruce Willis is really like. I mean, basically, it was just talking about the script and making sure uh, it was to his interest. But again, it was just interesting because apparently he did show interest in the De Palma book, so that was the um, so now I'm like, oh, I better this book better be good. It's one thing if you read it, I know you're a sympathetic friend. You'll tolerate some of the nonsense, but De Palma's going to be like, what is this crap? This guy knew
Yeah,
what
but
he
I
was
mean, he
talking about.
also wrote it, so that sort of works
No,
out.
no, I meant the Bogdanovich book. He says
Oh, the
he said he wants
Bogdanovich,
to
right?
read it. I'm just laughing because I'm like, well, that's exciting, but it's a little daunting that he evinced interest. But yes, I mean, just to be clear, so there's no, I don't know what his next plan is. I don't know. He's in the Hamptons. I'm in New York City, and um, it's been a very pleasant working relationship. But that's where it is. So
And
we'll
just
just
to wrap it up, when is the book coming out, and who's publishing, and where can people get it?
yeah, stickingplacebooks.com. It's Sticking Place Books it's a small publisher. He's been around for several years, film publisher. And I mean, he's got Werner Herzog, but he's got books by Patrick McGilligan, serious Jonathan Rosenbaum. He just put out a book by, who's a serious critic. I'm a US based critic, but he's pretty famous, and then he's so basically it's a small publisher, so it's the print on demand model. The idea that you don't make 2,000 copies where you have to pulp 1,500 of them and then it's all over. It's just like people order it, they buy it. So there is you can buy it from Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all the various places but it costs more. That if on the 26th, and this is because of Amazon rules or whatever like that, it can only you can't pre-order it. It's just the day that it's out. It will be available from stickingplacebooks.com at a sizable discount. I mean, a pretty serious discount. If you go there now, you'll see the other books at pretty serious discounts because you're cutting out Amazon.
Yep.
But that there is a button for the US and there's a button for the UK as well too. So you can buy it there. I'm not sure about, like, if you're in Italy, what's the best route to use, because with the European Union and stuff, I don't even know anymore. Is the UK
I
have
don't
any?
even know anymore.
Because you're in Ireland, right?
Yeah, well, Northern Ireland, so we're in a weird.
That's right. And then, so like, can you purchase from the UK? It's like
I
you're part of
can.
the
We were
UK.
technically the UK, but there's weird embargo. I don't even understand how it all comes in.
But I mean, technically, I think as you haven't separated. I'm not, making political. I'm just the idea being that you could probably order from the UK link and get the book. Is what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
no, I can definitely get it from the UK. So
Yeah.
that's
So that was because that was only because this is just conversation. The UK buttons were only added a few weeks ago. Before it was just there was a US link, but now you can order it officially in pounds or whatever via the UK link and get it quickly. So it is stickingplacebooks.com, and there's a lot of good books there. I mean, I'm doing some work with them because of the Bogdanovich book, and I helped a little bit with this David Mamet. Actually, that's one that can be announced. There is a David Mamet book coming out
right.
next month called Russian Poland, which is a terrific script. He wrote that in 1992 or something like that. So I'm just saying it's I think some of these guys, it's not my, but I think they appreciate maybe the lack of complications. I mean, David Mamet's a guy who gets anything he wants to get published can get published, as far as I can tell. The guy has like 112 books in print, but I think he just sort of liked the model where basically, okay, you sell the book, send me my royalties, and you know.
Which, why
So
not? There's
well,
no BS.
yeah, and I just sort of feel by having Werner Herzog and Mamet and De Palma and Bruce Joel Rubin as the first four people, that's not a bad list
No,
of of of, uh,
and it
of writers to get
sets
out there.
expectations for, I think, things to come. Presumably, there's more with you, but
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, he's got the whole series, which I'm not. I'm a part of it when I'm a part of it, in a sense. There are a couple of things. Um, Like there are books that I didn't find or anything, but I might write the introduction for. Where he'll just hire me to write a little introduction for it. But with any hope, I'll be a little bit provocative just to annoy you. There's a cult filmmaker who's no longer alive, who I am trying to get a script published. A cult genre filmmaker who's no longer alive, and I'm trying to get a script of his published that is hopefully coming down the line before the end of the year. But
I'm not curious.
I
I
can try.
have an idea who it might be, but I'm not going to say it out loud.
So fair enough. So yeah, I mean, it might not even come out. So that's but Ambrose Chapel, I think I posted that the physical copies are in hand, not in my hand, but my publisher has physical copies, and he's sending me my copies, and we'll get you a copy
Well,
as I promised him.
well. Thank. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I loved your. I mean, we'll wrap it up now because it
Yeah,
is
sure. It's gone on forever.
almost
Yeah,
11:30 here at night with me. So,
yeah, sure, sure.
but I no, I really enjoyed it. I thought, I loved your introduction. I thought it was a very good understanding of De Palma as a filmmaker, and I'm not just saying that. I think a great overview of his career, and I love the screenplay. I thought like I said before, you could really visualize what he would bring to making it as a filmmaker, not necessarily just as a writer.
Yeah, no, that's. I thought. I mean, it's just a very readable screenplay. That was the only where I tried to sort of what's the word, format the action so that it would be easily readable. It's because I'm like, no, this is a readable script. People can read this thing. They just got to and so luckily he was not precious about it. He's like, yeah, do that. So I think anybody who I mean, it's a cliche, and obviously I'm biased in that I'm involved, but I think anybody who thinks they might enjoy this book are going to enjoy this book. I think it will fulfill the expectations. If you're a De
Well,
Palma
that's it. I mean,
fan,
if you love film and you love De Palma, then it's a no-brainer. I mean, from my
I mean,
perspective.
because obviously an unproduced script could technically be a dog, some awful thing that just made no sense that didn't come together. But I'm pretty sure if you're a De Palma fan, you're going to like this and enjoy this. So
Yeah, no, definitely. And yep, James, and thank you again for the
sure.
opportunity to do this,
No,
for
thank you
coming
for
to me and offering.
yep. And great, yeah. And so if something else interesting comes down the pipeline, I'll let you know.
No, definitely. And at some point, we will do the Dino De Laurentiis that we've been
Yeah, well, that
thinking
one can
about.
hold off because actually I do have basically a book contract for that for next year. So I mean, we can time it into the book when that thing is.
Perfect. We will do it. And that gives me time to do my Dino De Laurentiis homework because I do want to do a bit of a rewatch before we get into that.
King Kong Lives is waiting for you, buddy. Maximum Overdrive. I'm going to force you date with an angel. You've got
I
some.
own at least 2 of those on DVD, so I don't have to go far.
Oh, this is. I'm the only person on earth who's thrilled by this, but because I am basically, as I'm sort of obsessed with the studio, I do have copies of all the films that I can have, that have come out. And Kino Lorber, which is a U.S. company, I'm sure you're aware of it, though I guess they just announced a 4K release of Hiding Out, the John Cryer, John Cryer's follow-up to Pretty in Pink, where he plays a stockbroker who goes on who hides out in high school because mafia guys are trying to kill him. Bob Giraldi made it.
You're not buying, are you?
It's a no, but it's a De Laurentiis film.
Yeah,
Oh,
so you've got to.
Yeah, no, in other words, I'm just laughing because I'm like, it's like they announced a 4K, release. I mean, it's never been on DVD or anything, so but it's just one of those things where I guess there's it's a film that has, it's not a disaster of a film. It's an okay film. It was just a flop, but it's like I'm the only person who was like, I can't believe it. I was thrilled, that Hiding Out is coming out on 4. Yeah, most of the Bond films aren't out on 4K yet, but I got my John Cryer DEG film.
At least someone's happy, James.
I might just buy 2 copies so that they see the support. But yeah, so hopefully things go well and good to see you again. I forgot. I mean, are you going to edit this a bit, or or you pretty much just put it
I'll
on?
edit a few snippets, but I like to freestyle it and just go for it.
Oh, sure. I just there's a bit of rambling, so feel free. I'm saying feel free to edit. I wasn't.
My life is rambling, so
But all right. So then we'll be in touch.
Yep. Cheers, James. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Movies in Focus podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts, and I hope that you tell your friends about it. That's it for this time, and I'll see you at the movies.